Sure, everybody's coming. Yep, I think everybody's on the way.
That's one mention that Mongo is actually too big for what.
Yeah, I can be going. For a lot of what I'm working on, it's a showstopper. The fact that maybe if it's over 150, then I'm probably get stuck in that. I'm going to the system. The other thing is, Mongo is a good fit on a lot of stuff. But for certain things, I'm working on it's pretty easy. Yeah, I need something that fits in like 130 megabyte range, maybe less than that.
Yeah.
That's true.
Huh?
All right.
No, it's pretty good. Yes.
I know, just for web apps, it's not a common story. People stop making it.
I think it's funny that I got your old laptop.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's like,
Scaling would hold.
I was trying to set some stuff up, and I was like, oh, it's already there.
It's already all set up. That's funny.
VMs, and he was like running the top of there. I'm like,
It was already there.
the Windows 8. Oh,
Excuse me, I got a mouthful of pizza. So, all right, I'm Doug Coppin. This is Doug Schnauzer. We're at Europe, Missouri right now, obviously, and this is the Nova Mean meetup, with Mean meaning Mongo, Express, Angular, Node, and all that far out in technology. This is a meetup group that started probably 4 or 5 months ago that Doug had the idea for. That is a particularly good idea, I think, because it's not focused on a single topic. Instead, it ends up being at least 4 different technologies that gives you an end-to-end system, frankly. I mean, in the end, you can make almost anything using Mean. And because of that, it's an interesting area. It's fertile ground in terms of presentations and experiences. It's not like everybody's focused on one single little thing. Instead, what we're finding is that people have experiences that run across the spectrum, from how to do it, what parts to use, how to fit the parts together, what effectively works, and it's a relatively young area on top of that, which makes it that much more exciting when you're trying to do it for real in the real world. So tonight, previously, a few of the sessions that we had were on Mongo, Angular, etc., and Node, for example. But we thought tonight would be an interesting one to talk about deploying it, meaning if you're going to take that and put it out into the real world, what does that really mean? And it means a few things. So we've got a couple presentations tonight, and the third one, Tom, hasn't shown up yet. So we may only have 2 out of 3, but we'll see. But what I was going to do is talk about some of our experiences with the Beanstalk, Elastic Beanstalk and AWS, and what we've learned from that, and some of the pros and cons, or things to be aware of. Con isn't the right word, it's just things to be aware of. And then Andy and Matt are going to talk about CloudFormation and some of the things that they've done with some cool stuff at that. So I think that it's going to be a particularly good session. So, all that, if we're ready to fire it up, actually, let's do quick introductions. Is there anybody that has anything unique that they want to pass along about themselves? Anything far out? Because each meeting we're seeing a few extra people or a few new people each time, so it's always interesting to hear what experiences there are. Huh?
I just want to say, I was only here once before, and someone was asking a question about how to curtail their Mean Mongo database from consuming an entire purchase.
Oh, yeah.
And it occurred to me after the meeting that, wow, you really need to put a container around that. Just tell the container how much memory it purchases you.
You know, that's an interesting point, because...
And in the 3 weeks since, containers have splashed out onto the world. Now we're talking about containers.
Absolutely.
I've done containerization a long time under BSD jails and Solaris elements and stuff I have an interest in, and I'm getting back into it under Red Hat setup. So if you're interested in that, I'll be happy to work with you.
Cool. That's a particularly good one, because we've ran into an issue of that at least once now, where we've been trying, in one case we had a test system, we were trying to run Mongo in, and Mongo, we were starting it up, was taking over everything in AWS or an EC2 instance. And it was affecting some of the other things, so we ended up pushing Mongo out just for that reason. But that's a particularly good point, actually. I hadn't considered that containers would make that a better way of doing it. Then what we were going to do was just start a smaller instance, actually, and do it that way. So good point. All right, well, actually, let's do some quick introductions just to see. So we'll start with you.
So I'm a front-end developer. I've been doing a little bit of back-end here and there. I used to do a lot more back-end. I used to do learning management systems. Now I'm more of a front-end developer, working for Fannie Mae.
There's somebody at the door.
Oh, no, they're good.
I'm very interested in, and I guess all the cloud. I tried Heroku. I tried a couple of things. Docker, what's the other one? Virtualization tools.
All right.
I'm a front-end developer, working in a mobile web app for the VA. I have done back-end. We did cloud a little bit, but it was really weird.
That was really weird.
For government contract, it wasn't going anywhere. And I'm really interested in something more like a mean apps. Sounded cool.
Yeah. All right. Keep going.
I'm Bill. Pretty much a full stack developer. My forte is Python Django as backend. Mongo as well for my DB. I'm pretty new to the mean stack though itself.
Yeah, well, it's a good place. So my name is Paul Barzani. During the day, I'm a UI developer. Spend a lot of time doing interactive visualization. I've done that in a while now, but probably trying to drag that into some of the stuff I do at work. Interested, we use Angular on our front end, and just interested in understanding the full stack better.
Alan Lane, I work for Boeing. I'm pretending to be a front-end developer. I started as an embedded programmer in C, C++ world, and just working my way up to the mean stack. I've been using mean for the last 8 months now, or not Mongo part, but everything but Mongo. So yeah, it's been pretty fun so far.
Mike Brandenberger, I work for Herrick Labs. I'm also a recent embedded programmer. I've been asked to work on UI, so doing the full web stack. So looking at that, it means so new to it.
I'm David High. I started as a thick application C++ developer, and just started moving back towards the thin client. And so this is all new. Still has to be behind the firewall, so it's not even a SaaS. It has to be a thin client infrastructure intranet. So try to drop this all slowly. We currently have an Angular application on top of IIS, which is gross, and we're slowly starting to put the Mongo and the Express.
Cool. Right.
I'm Helen Gong, not a developer, actually the experience. Just come here to learn about something I'm not familiar.
I'm Greg. I'm a developer in a lot of different languages, and I don't know anything about me. So I came over here.
Cool.
My name is Matthew Fincher. I'm a software architect and development team leader. I've actually deployed a couple of large-scale mean apps. One was for the last Super Bowl for Tostitos. Yeah, I did a karaoke machine for AT&T that's currently on tour with their. I don't know if anybody's a country music fan. It was kind of an interesting the Socket.io project. So that's there, and then I recently joined Openware, and I'm a cloud architect at Openware. I'm going to be presenting one of our latest tools that we've built.
Very cool.
Yeah, my name's Andy Heifetz. I'm with Openware. I've been using Node. We did some backend applications for about a year, so I have some good, experiences to share, and we'll be speaking about that later. I also had a question for the group later. If anyone has ever had Node accredited on a government system, we can talk afterwards. But I'd just be curious if anyone's ran into that.
All right. Okay. We'll go back.
Ben Vanderwall, I'm involved in the Missouri group. We've got a couple of Node projects that I'm working on, and we integrate Node with other systems like JBoss and the others.
Your Node project has a good name.
Elvis.
Elvis.
Nice.
My name is Benny Sucheti. I'm the Canadian North American and principal software engineer and developer there. My experience with mean stack is only with Angular. I played around with Node, and I have an opportunity to develop a complete application on the Node or the Beanstalk, but I'm just trying to see, not use Java.
I'm Daniel May. I'm also here in Missouri. I'm on contract right now with the Smithsonian, where we're doing a Cordova mobile app, but we're using a lot of Angular and that sort of stuff for kind of a back end on the client. So I'm just kind of hoping to learn a little more about some of the other new components for maybe some future projects that they might be interested in.
My name is Ruslan. I work at the Department of Education in Missouri, and we're using home stack now, Department of Education, Node, and Angular stuff.
They haven't asked us about certification yet. but it'd be good for us to know too, in case they do at some point.
Ray Daly. I have my own little product company called Daily Apps. They're working on my current project is Great Aunt, Great Uncle. It's jQuery mobile using HTTP and Redis with Node and looking to replace, put Happy in as the new replacement. But just started looking at that because the people at npm.com just chose that over Happy. So just started looking to see what that's about, since I'm going to have to upgrade to 4.0.
I'm Joe. If you know programmers do, I do everything else. System administrator for almost 30 years. And currently I'm building a Google Earth Globe for the Department of Justice.
I'm Tom. I am an operations engineer for a startup. We're a rail shop mostly, and but definitely looking at Node for future APIs, etc.
Cool. I'm Doug. And yep, we're getting deeper and deeper into means, so it's great to have everybody out. It's nice to have a reasonable size too, where you can go, and it's very interesting to see where everybody's coming from.
Yes. Well, you know, with everything that people talked about, there are things that kind of catch your ear. One of which is that it's people that are working at both ends, basically, meaning that having the ability to be a developer at the front end and the back end means that, for one thing, you're going to have more work, but the team is going to be a little more homogeneous. They're going to be a little more familiar with each other. You're potentially going to be able to share tools and environment to some degree. So I think you'll end up hearing that more and more, and you'll tend to find, or what I'm expecting you'll tend to find, are that will become the norm over time, but it'll take a while to get to that point, and the earlier you get experience in it, the better. I think that the other point that you made earlier about the accreditation, that leads into the subject of containers at some point. And I know we have Isaac Christopherson here doing a lot of work with Docker, and the interest level in terms of could you get something like a Docker container accredited that has a set of stuff in it that you could then make use of, as opposed to just trying to fit some particular area. In a sense, whatever that term is, I can't think of the name right now. I'm drawing a blank on a stack of versions that are all certified. So I think that there's a lot of potential in it. So, given that, I thought we'd go ahead and get started. I'll do a little overview on the Beanstalk, some of my experience. I'll do a little overview on the Elastic Beanstalk and some of what our experience has been on it. I think that something I wanted to point out that's worthwhile to think about on this is on the mean deployments, things that you have to consider is that now you actually end up having the responsibility for the whole end. That's one thing to consider. In the past, it's sort of, well, we got a database group, but we got another group that's responsible for that, those sorts of things. When you start getting into the meat area, it's very easy to begin to just have a single set of people that really does the whole thing. And I think that because of that, you now end up with some more responsibilities that others didn't, that you didn't have in the past. Like you can't say, oh, the DBA will do that, because you're probably going to be the DBA, frankly, or somebody in your group is most likely going to be. And that's a worthwhile thing to be aware of, that there are aspects of that can be challenging or a little fearsome, frankly, at times. I think that one of the other things to think about now is that with the mean stack, you can deploy the whole thing on one host if you want to, depending on the type of size you're looking at. So you have to consider those aspects of it. how big of a deployment it's going to be, and are you going to segregate the back end from the front end? Are you going to put them all in one place, et cetera? And that leads into a little bit of the elastic beanstalk discussion. You have to consider traffic between hosts, security, obviously, security in the outside world, because now you're doing things differently. You might have everything in a smaller area. Well, now you got to be careful about, is the internet going to have access to your Mongo, for example, and so on. So again, you may not be able to rely on the database group to take care of that, or a DBA who's got 20 years experience. It may be you who's throwing that out there in a hurry, and you got to have some degree of confidence that you're not going to have everybody trolling around inside your database. Which leads to that question as to, when we say mean stack, are you going to go grab the pieces yourself and throw them down on host somewhere, or are you going to find package configurations that exist? And it's an area that vendors are approaching quickly, obviously, they're working to approach. But it still ends up being very easily, I won't say casual decisions, but it's very easy for a development team to roll this stuff in a hurry, get it out there, throw this stuff out to production, which then means operations now got to support it. And along with mean, and I think I didn't put that on here, that is something to consider, is the rate of change in it, meaning the number of versions that are coming out in weeks or months. The things that get popular on GitHub for a while and then start to fall off, and other things start to get popular on it. And that's where I'm very interested in the long run, is how operations groups will deal with those kind of things, where one guy say, I'm going to use Express, and another guy says, I'm going to use something else. Somebody else says, I want to use Mongoose. Somebody else says, I want to use Mongoose. I want to go to Mongo Direct. Those kind of things. And I think that will be a challenge in terms of operations support and configurations in the long run. I have a vivid memory years ago of a developer I worked at a company. It was a long-term experienced guy, really knew some stuff, decided to do something new in Ruby, and we didn't have a single, or the operations group didn't have a single Ruby system anywhere. And yet he had it all working. He said, here, operations, so put this in. And they said, well, how do we do that? How do we monitor it? How do we know what's going on in it? And those are things that have to be considered. So I think that when you get to the roll your own, or get into that area pretty fast. Obviously, you got the usual stuff on how's your front end going to scale. Is it going to scale? Have you got to think about that? How's that going to work for you? Another area to think about is static content. These are all things that, again, with the mean stack, it's not unusual for you to end up having to make decisions in areas that you may not have had to in the past. And I think that that's kind of an interesting challenge, frankly, and that's part of the things I'll keep you up at night when you wonder about it. And then lastly, another aspect of the mean stack that's kind of interesting is monitoring. Is that now that you're responsible for everything, you can kind of architect the monitoring yourself, and you can think of ways to do it that'll benefit you, and you can reach in and do it yourself. You're not reliant, you're not dependent, I won't say reliant, you're not necessarily dependent on entire other organizations to put your monitoring together, which means now you got to do something that works reasonably well. You can't just throw in log statements or whatever. So what thought I would talk about was the Beanstalk. And our experience with a couple of projects now with the AWS Elastic Beanstalk is a quick way to put something out there, basically. That's what it kind of boils down to. And I'm going to explain that in a little more detail in a moment, but I'm not sure how many people have even heard of the term Elastic Beanstalk, for that matter, in AWS. I mean, AWS is an area I'm continually fascinated with the breadth of technology and stuff that's in it. And the real challenge is just being aware of it. And then the next challenge is knowing what you can do and can't do and what makes sense to do. And just awareness, much less being conversant, can be tough at times. So I think that what I decided to do was put up a couple of things that said, what is the Elastic Beanstalk? And I found a couple of entries, one on Wikipedia, one from Amazon. And primarily, Beanstalk is a way that you can automatically, or that automatically orchestrates the creation of stuff for you. And that stuff takes a lot of the load off of you in terms of how you're going to manage DNS, how you're going to get traffic to it, how you're going to scale it, how you're going to do capacity measurements, etc., how you're going to control your capacity, and so on. So Elastic Beanstalk has been around for a number of years, but it seems to be growing more and more, and our experience with it has been relatively positive to date. But the other side of that is that we've also kind of learned it on the job as to what to do and what not to do and how to do it. So I think that if you take a look at what Amazon says, easy to use. And it is easy to use. And that's the thing that we found. When we did our first deployment to the internet, AWS and the internet, of something that we had something running pretty quickly. I mean, in a period of a very few days, we had a system up and working, and it definitely did stuff for us. We had to learn the hard way a couple of times on what not to do and all, which is a little bit of what I'm going to talk about shortly. But the primary thing with Beanstalk is it lets you orchestrate the production of your at least front end system, and it gives you a set of choices in it. And those choices range from, are your web servers going to be Java, .NET, they're going to be Node, Python, Ruby, etc., meaning that it's aware of those things and therefore it's built some infrastructure around them. Or are you going to do something else in that front end? With Beanstalk, because of those pre-built or pre-packaged or the ability to pick a template, it tends to make you want to be in those areas. And their supporting Node accommodates that pretty well. But along with that, there are aspects of it that I found to be a little bit challenging, and that is it's not necessarily obvious what versions of things are sitting out there. For example, in Elastic Beanstalk, if you go to say, I want to put me up the latest Node version that's out there, it's actually not easy to figure out what that is. It can take a little while to decide what version are they. And if you put the wrong one in there, if you specify a version and it isn't one that's there, it actually can cause some confusion as to why something isn't running right now. It's not necessarily obvious. So, and I'll talk about that a bit more later on. But the primary thing about the Beanstalk that I found is quick spin up. Go in there and you can quickly get something that will be Node. You can upload code to it. It'll put a load balancer in front of it. It'll put a web proxy in front of that. And all these things are in place in minutes, potentially as short as literally just a few minutes. And at that point, you've got something that you can reach from the internet and send traffic to your node instance. So you could have an idea, have this far out node script that you want to do. You can have it in a scalable, on the internet with elastic scalability in front of that, meaning the number of instances go up and down, completely automated in minutes, and it'll be working just fine with no complaint at all. So I think that as it grows around it, particularly as you become dependent on other services, it can be a little more of a learning experience again, which is some of what we went to. I think that the primary thing that I like about it is the idea that you can put some code up there, and if it starts getting traffic and the CPU starts going up and it starts going up and up and up, Amazon or the Elastic Beanstalk will start another instance, deploy your code to it, set the load balancer to handle traffic between the two, and now you've got two running, and you're beginning to take capacity, or you're beginning to increase your capacity relatively easy. One of the other aspects that are interesting about it is the way that you put code on Elastic Beanstalk instances. Built in, and really the only things that are there are zip files, or you can do it via GIF, which in the end actually ends up being zip. It's just not as obvious. By that, what I mean is you can develop your node stuff on your own machine, have everything working just fine, zip it up into an archive and go, and it will deploy it to the Beanstalk, and it'll orchestrate the deployment, and it will decide whether it worked or not. And if it does work, it'll leave it there. If it won't, it'll roll it back to the prior version, all built in within itself. And that is something that lets you really quickly deploy code. And that's the thing that I like about it. You can also do it with pushes, get pushes from your machine. This is an area that was a little more challenging when we kind of experimented with in terms of multiple developers. And that, again, if you're one guy sitting there and you're doing all this, it's great. Now you got 5 guys spread all over the place. It takes a little more knowledge, a little more understanding of how to do it, how to use Git to talk to it, and aspects of how you're going to start it, meaning is one of these guys going to create it, or is it already running? Was it already running because somebody else started it, and so on. So I found that it was easiest and most understandable to do it with a zip archive. And by that, what I mean is I would go out there to Amazon and say, create me an Elastic Beanstalk. I want it to be Node, an application. I want it to be a Node environment, and go from there. And here's my zip file for the first archive, and it gets everything done. When I tried to have an instance that was already running, and then I tried to deploy using Git to it a different way than was originally created, I ran into problems, and I never could understand what was wrong and what wasn't wrong, which is another aspect. We'll talk about this more later. But one of the other nice aspects is because Elastic Beanstalk is orchestrating the deployment for you, it's versioning what you're putting up there, meaning that as you send an archive up to it, or by whatever method, it's keeping a list of those, and it's keeping track of them so that you can go back at any time and say, yeah, I don't like what's up right now, I'm going to drop back to this version. Or I'm going to start another environment, I want to put this version on that. So that's something that I think has worked reasonably well for us. Of course, it also becomes easy to turn into a hodgepodge where people are uploading versions constantly. Now you've got versions all over the place, and you're not necessarily putting enough effort into indicating what the descriptions of the versions are. So I think there's an area of orchestration that there's some opportunities for improvement in there. In fact, we got to where we stopped having developers do the upload themselves directly via the Elastic Beanstalk UI or CLI. Instead, I have a bash script that does it for them by first checking to make sure everything going in the archive is what's supposed to be there, giving them the option to add a description to the archive so that goes up there with it, so there's some kind of information rather than just a random zip file name sitting up there and versioning of it. So that's an area I think that was kind of a learning thing as well, because we ended up doing a number of deployments over a number of days, and we'd end up having 10 or 15 versions of these things, and we know when it was done, but we didn't necessarily know why or what was in it. So it's that CM aspect that's always interesting when it comes to production environments. So I think that some of the other benefits that are nice are the idea that DNS gets set up for you. Meaning you can create an Elastic Beanstalk environment and it'll give it a name and register DNS for you, and now you've got an environment that's usable. It may not be the name you want to use in a log graph, but it'll at least be a name that's sitting out there, and you don't have to know anything more than that. So you could literally have a great idea, you could be a hot node programmer, write some code, in an hour have it out on the internet, and publish the name for it, and bam, you got all kinds of traffic going to it, and you're rich by the afternoon. Somebody buys you tomorrow, and you go home, and
do it again.
And do it again. And become a serial entrepreneur. Or you just have fun doing it, which is the other side. And that's the area I think that we're probably all most interested in, just having fun doing this kind of thing. So with the Beanstalk, you create an application that says, I want to have an application I want to call Fred. I want it to be a node application. I want a load balancer in front of it. And there are one or two other things that you can pick on it. But primarily that's it. It creates an application that has a name at that point. And then you create environments under that name. And those environments are where you get some of the value in this. And that you can have an environment up that's referenced by that DNS name. You can create another environment, deploy your new code to that, make sure it does exactly what you want by using the name that goes directly to that environment, and then you can switch URLs, and all of a sudden that becomes your real environment. So you can kind of treat that I won't say standby, that other environment is like a canary almost, and that is you could begin to do testing in traffic management or run traffic to that second instance, and once you're satisfied it's doing exactly what you want, under Elastic Beanstalk, do a URL swap, and now it becomes your live environment, and so you're, in a sense, toggling back and forth between two environments at the point. And that has worked reasonably well.
Is that like A/B testing, or is more like just hot swap?
I think it's more like hot swap, but you can use it for A/B testing, meaning that the Beanstalk itself doesn't know you're doing this. It just knows that you got two environments out here, and the primary URL is going to this one. But you have a URL that's taking to the other one that you do your own work with, and once your own testing, or your B testing, then you can do the swap between the two. But it's not like Beanstalk knows that you're using it for testing. You're just swapping back and forth. But a caveat on that is the names can become confusing, and that's something that we experienced where we had two environments up. One of them was our production environment, the other was a test environment. We said, great, everything's working fine, swap URLs, it swaps. Now the name switched, and now it becomes a little confusing as to, well, which name applies to which environment. And that was sort of an interesting experience because it was easy to accidentally deploy to production when you didn't necessarily need to do that. So the main thing about it is it eases these areas, meaning you don't have to have as much knowledge to manage them and go through all this orchestration yourself, which is one of those primary benefits, I think, of some of this modern technology, is you don't have to have a whole bunch of people in different organizations on your team and all the coordination involved in that, and labels areas of expertise siloed in effect between all these organizations. Instead, it becomes very much I won't say homogeneous team, but it becomes a multi-skilled team as opposed to literally organizations that manage all these things. And I think things like this begin to accommodate those areas. So again, the easy deploy new code is one of the main benefits. It's aware of availability zones, meaning, again, from the Amazon perspective, I'm not talking a whole lot about AWS right now because that can turn into a big area. But in terms of availability zones, you could have an East Coast production or a data center and a West Coast one, for example, as two different availability zones, your configuration. And if one of them fails for whatever reason, traffic can be automatically sent to the other zone that you have set up. And that's supported by the Elastic Beanstalk again, which is a nice thing. Again, you don't necessarily have to be an expert in these areas. It's beneficial to know about them and to be familiar enough to understand how to do it, but you don't have to start from nothing and produce all these things yourself. So Amazon has these things built into it, and their tools and formation type templates such as Elastic Beanstalk know how to use them. Lastly, one of the other things that's interesting to see is it's kind of interesting to think that you could create an instance, deploy code to it, and never have to actually SSH that. Again, I speak from the Linux experience because that's the one true operating system. But Windows is supported as well. Excuse me. But the main thing is that never before had I been in a situation where I was able to start up a machine, put code on it, and have it run and be able to monitor without me having to SSH to it and do something to it. Now, the other side of that is that sounds great, but in the end you're going to need SSH to it one way or another, and that's almost been invariably our experience with it, that most of the time you don't need to, every now and then you will need to, and primarily it will be troubleshooting. Meaning something's not working and we don't know why. We deploy new code, it ain't there, it ain't doing something right. How do we know what's going on to that? So I've got a little more on that later on, but in the perfect world, you won't actually need to ever get onto the instance yourself, but you probably will. Now, things to consider in terms of mean in AWS are the layers that are going to exist out there. And again, I'm using a lot of AWS terminology in here that if you're not familiar with it, it'll be somewhat confusing to you, but I just wanted to get some talking points out there as to if you consider what is involved in any architecture in AWS, it's probably going to be these layers, and that is Route 53, which is DNS. So domain management, basically, meaning what am I going to call this thing, what IP is this going to get, and so on. With Elastic Beanstalk, these things are taken care of for you, mostly. Not 100%, but mostly they are. Load balancers, meaning that okay, you got a bunch of users out there, they think your code is the best thing in the world, and they're hitting it, and they're hitting more and more and more and more. Now you need to begin to have a concern as to, well, is all this traffic going to go to one giant super large instance that is costing you $1 gazillion a month? Or instead, are you going to have two instances behind it that are smaller ones, one of which you can spin down and save money in the middle of the night when you're in a valley traffic-wise? And I know at a previous job of mine, we had really big peaks and really low valleys, and our maintenance window tended to be 4 o'clock in the morning for that reason. And that was when we did everything that had to be done on the instances, which is a miserable time of day. But with Elastic, the Elastic load balancers and scalable aspects of the Elastic Beanstalk, you don't need to pay for that stuff all the time. And what we did before, we paid for these thousands of machines 24/7. We ran them all the time, and therefore we had all the costs associated with them. In this area, you don't necessarily need to do that, meaning you could have valleys where you spin down most of your instances completely automatically. Again, the Elastic Beanstalk will do that via some of the things that are in here. And as traffic begins to pick back up again, they'll start firing back up again. So you're only paying for what you need. And it was an interesting thing that there's a book I'm reading that I can't think of the name of. It has something to do with cloud architecture. But they make a particularly good point in it, and that is no wasted resources. And don't pay for something that you don't actually have to have at any moment in time. And the mean architecture with the front end being supported by these things really accommodate that. Got a proxy sitting in there. You got web server. Web server tier is the node, whatever the other things are, since everybody's into node. I can't think of the other ones right now. And then the workers behind that. By workers, the term that I'm using is the other portions of the M side of it, for example. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. You may have highly scalable front ends that are being spun up and shut down as needed. Unscalable backend. You may have Mongo sitting on one instance in the back end, and that be it. Or you might be doing something like RDS. You might be using some other facility. So, and in fact, in our group, when we say mean, we don't necessarily mean it always has to be the mean everything. It may be you've got 3 out of the 4, and the 4th one is something else that has a known interface to it. So I think that that begins to be an interesting area. With mean in AWS, you have to think in terms of security groups. And the security groups are how you manage who can get to what and what instances can talk to each other. So with the Elastic Beanstalk, you can control that pretty well so that you manage who's getting to it. with the non-elastic Beanstalk aspects of the system, such as Mongo, for example. It probably is not going to be accessible from the internet. It may be only accessible from your node instances, for example. So I think that security groups is an area that we've had some learning on as to how to manage them. And one of the primary notes that I learned on that was, initially we said, this is great, we're going to put everything in one security group. We'll have everything in one place. That worked just fine until we needed to do something where all of a sudden we didn't want Mongo accessible from the internet, or we wanted this over here to be accessible but not that over there. So the lesson that we learned in that area was all of our instance types have their own security group, such as there's a Mongo security, there's a BRMS security group, there's a front-end security group, for example. Those things were important to us because it became difficult to control everything, and that really became evident when we put BRMS in. When we put our rule system in, and we wanted Node to talk to it, and we wanted the internet to talk to it, when everything was in one security group, we had to open up port 80, which now meant everybody in that security group had port 80 open. It's like, well, that was stupid. So, and it took a while to fix that problem. It was not something that we fixed overnight. It ended up being shut the instance down, or created the new security group, shut the instance down, fire it back up again in another security group, which is not a difficult process, but it is something that does take a little bit of time and orchestration to do. So, which leads into VPC, virtual, whatever they stand for. I can't think what that is right now. But in the Amazon world, VPCs allow you to segregate, in a sense, containerize all your stuff, network-wise primarily, so that you can have a VPC now, that now you can have front-end access to a VPC that then has within it a filtering process or configuration that says what host can be accessed from the internet, what can't be. So view a VPC as, I wish I could think of what it would be, virtual private cloud. That is private cloud. I kept saying container. I knew that was wrong. Virtual private cloud. Virtual private cloud is the better way to do these things, but it takes a little more knowledge. Meaning you can spin up Elastic Beanstalk legacy standard instances really fast without having to think about a lot of these things other than just having a security group for the back end, essentially. When you get to the VPC area, there's more architecture or more thinking involved in it, I found anyway. And it was one of those things that we experimented with and we didn't have a need for, but I know we're going to have to at some point. And I'm positive we'll move to VPC world when we finally have to. And I'm interested in what you all.
Do you still have to terminate the tunnel at your enterprise and maintain a high availability network connectivity from here, for example, or is there another place to?
No, it's all self-contained up there.
Yeah, it's a software-defined network.
Yeah,
you can establish VPN tunnels, but it's
you
just
can
a
do
software-defined
VPN tunnels
network.
back to your existing network, but it'd be separate.
That's not the only way anymore.
No, so I think I'm not sure. I don't totally know what virtual private clouds are in Amazon.
It's a way for you to say that I want all my instances within this. I want this subnetwork range of IP addresses associated.
Yeah,
Which now means your security
yeah.
would become much easier to manage and say
So
10.0.2.3. Yeah, so
but in the beginning, that tunnel went to your enterprise. Maybe there's new.
Yeah, you can have an internet gateway so you can get through it through SSH or HTTP directly from the internet, or you can have a VPN tunnel through the back. Depends how you want to set it up.
So the web server tier, excuse me. By that, what I mean is the node and other applications that act as your front end, where your instances are going to be and what it is that they're running. That becomes an important aspect of this because that is really what the Elastic Beanstalk is. Everything else isn't Elastic Beanstalk, Mongo specifically. But I will say that I ran across an interesting GitHub repo some time ago where a guy had done some really interesting stuff with EV extensions. And if you're not familiar with that, in the Elastic Beanstalk, you can have everything be in your little Mongo, your zip file that you upload, bang, codes it there, everything's running fine. But invariably, you'll tend to find that, I need to make this directory when I install stuff automatically, or I need to do this configuration in Nginx or something like that, kind of as an aside, basically. EV extensions, .ev extensions, is a way in the Elastic Beanstalk for you to do that. What it is that as a part of the archive that you upload, the zip file you upload, you can have an EV extensions directory, and under it have a series of files that get executed in a sense, kind of like GitHub, GitHooks. And that is, before the installation do these sets of commands, like create some directories or remove these directories or archive some stuff. After the installation, do these things, those sorts of things.
So it's like Maven or
It's very, very analogous, I think, to
Lifecycle
that.
stuff,
Yeah.
sure.
EV extensions got a lot of power in it, but where it can be challenging, and this is something that Chris and I experienced a while back, is you can't test it on a Mac, meaning that it's not as easy to do EV extensions because EV extensions is running in AWS, or that's where the orchestration is occurring. So it meant that there were things that we could do that were AWS specific that weren't duplicated on our own machines. So as a result, testing was a little more challenging, I found. And that if you look at that architectural orchestration with load balancers, et cetera, you don't have all those things on your laptop. So you can develop all your code, but you're not necessarily simulating or replicating the whole environment that occurs in AWS. So, and that's an interesting area that made testing a little harder sometimes, where you could test your code, but how about all them layers around your code, behind your code, in the back end? And that was sort of an area that we've had some learning on as to things that worked or didn't work. We had a few things that we did that didn't work. We never quite knew why and weren't able to pursue them. But the main thing I was making about the EV extensions was that this guy had this neat Git repo where he had taken the EV extensions to the max, where he was actually deploying Mongo in his Elastic Beanstalk instance in EV extensions. And it was an interesting idea where now you could literally have everything be in your Elastic Beanstalk, whereas the way that we do it, we've got the front end that's Elastic Beanstalk, and in the back end, which is our BRMS and Mongo, they are kind of, I call them workers, but that's not really the correct term, but they're instances off to the side that our front end instances can talk to when they need to, or are configured to talk to. With EV extensions, this guy had taken it so that he could deploy Mongo as the instance was firing up, but then he had to deal with scalability, meaning, let's say Amazon said, hey, this thing's getting a lot of traffic, I'm going to start me up another instance. Well, do you want to configure a Mongo in that instance? So he had some sophisticated stuff that could actually, if I remember correctly, check and see, did they already have Mongo deployed somewhere else? If not, don't deploy a new one, just set up the connections to point to the other one. So the point being with the scalability and elasticity that's cool about Elastic Beanstalk is make your code, Amazon will start as many instances as it needs to run and support the traffic going to it. But you got to make sure that you're not firing up 10,000 Mongos, for example, which you probably don't want to do. So anyway, that was another area that was sort of an interesting thing. There we go, virtual private cloud. The main points on this, logically isolated section. So you create something that says, within my VPC, I want to have these instances, I want to have this IP range, I want these IPs to talk to each other, et cetera. So everything is within this one VPC configuration. You don't have a whole bunch of security group configurations going on. So, and I know in our case, we've got something like 30 security groups right now because we've evolved them over time, and it begins to be hard to figure out what did we have 6 months ago, and do we still need it anymore? Is anybody using that or not? So it's easy to generate some crush that eventually we'll have to deal with. But the primary thing with VPC is VPCs are probably the best way to do anything if you've got more than one of something that you're going to be doing. And that more than one is something almost invariably is you got your database in the back end. That's an example of it. If you just have node instances and nothing else, you probably don't need a VPC. Let's see, and that's the point I made a moment ago about the side effect is, let's say you got your node instance running, you can SSH to it, you figure, that's right, I need to put this file on there. So you whip that file through with SCP real quickly, everything's hunky dory. Overnight, you get 20,000 requests a minute. Amazon fires up 10 more instances to deal with them. Those instances don't have that file on them. So that's one of the aspects of this, is that you have to make sure that the way you manage the Elastic Beanstalk is that Amazon has a package of everything it needs to do to create, to replicate your environment on other instances. So that's an interesting area to mess with. Challenging. I'm going to speed up on this because I'm spending too much time talking about it. Because of the Elastic Beanstalk doing all this, there's a whole lot of steps in it. From beginning to done, somebody's going to buy me tomorrow, there's a whole bunch of steps that go on. It becomes difficult to know what all those steps are and to figure out what they are. Because of that, what we found was you got log files all over the place. For example, the logs that I listed up here are the ones that we regularly have to look at if something goes wrong, or if we think something's wrong, or we're trying to figure out what's going on. Which leads into now you've got, let's say you've got 10 node instances, you've got all these files on all of them, and something's wrong somewhere, you got to eyeball all them files, you're going to SSH to look around. Eventually you're going to say, you know, we need to have log file aggregators in here. And that's where Logstash or something like it, like Splunk or some of the others will come in, where what you'll probably want to do at some point is on each of your instances have some kind of log file forwarding mechanism like Logstash and a Logstash server sitting out there so that all your instances are aggregating or sending all the log stuff you care about to that central guy, and now when something goes wrong, go take a look at your Logstash server. And in our case, we have the typical Logstash chain of Redis, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. So I mean, it's all free stuff that you put together. It all works well, but you'll tend to find with Elastic Beanstalk that you'll need to have something to get all these log files in one place. Challenging aspect. We're almost done with my part of this. Failed deployments may not always be obvious, meaning Elastic Beanstalk may not realize something failed, or may think something failed that didn't actually fail because of the way that something exited, for example, during the installation or in the EV extensions. Sometimes we've had situations where the Beanstalk thought it was running a version that it wasn't actually running. It actually fallen back and we didn't realize that. So this has happened to us a few times. And one of the things that I've been wanting us to get in the habit of is somewhere in our front end, it would be worthwhile to have a way to have a version indicator. Have something so we can look at that and know this is what we're running. Because it can be difficult if you've got some trivial thing back in some CSS file somewhere that's your only change. Is that change up there or not? Well, let's go navigate through all the windows until we find it, or check some version indicator that lets you know what are we actually running. And I think that that's a worthwhile thing to do, is always have some way to interrogate your system and know what is actually running. Don't necessarily rely on the orchestration to tell you. Node modules and accumulated crush. Man, testing-wise, more than once, everything's worked just perfectly on somebody's laptop. They put that thing up there and it rolls back to the prior version. And as part of your development and testing process, blow away your environment, rebuild it from scratch. It's very easy for a developer to say, I don't want to wait 5 minutes for all my node modules to install. Everything's going to work just fine. It works perfectly on my laptop. I'm going to zip it up, send it up there. And, so that's just another aspect of any software environment, obviously. But it's very easy, again, with the mean stack, as I was saying earlier, that you begin to have smaller teams, fewer organizations, which means now you may have less traditional QA, less traditional process, and so on. And those things can come at a price when things go bad. Debugging. How do you know everything worked? You got NPM, Karma, Bower, all those things installing all sorts of modules, files, versions. It's all over the place. We have problems about once a month with Bower saying, hey, there's a new version. You want me to install it? Except Amazon doesn't know what that means. The Elastic Beanstalk says Bower's not working. I'm going to roll back. So an aspect of mean, or in this case, Node or Angular, is you should have the ability for it never to go interactive on an installation, no matter what. Not in a helpful fashion or nothing. I don't want Bower to ask me if I want a new version in the Elastic Beanstalk ever. And that has caused us problems more than once, and it takes a while to realize that's what's wrong.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you have, I guess, what is this? I just forgot. And like on your first slide, you mentioned that it runs Node.
Yeah.
It runs different things, right? So let's say you can use the lightweight containers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of Elastic Beanstalk, or that will be part of that?
The Elastic Beanstalk is what actually installs and configures the version of Node running on the machine. So it's what's installing Node itself. I don't mean your script, well, it is on your script, but the Node version that's out there.
So, and part of that was you have Docker, right?
Yep.
Is Docker, so wouldn't it be easier or better to just run Docker, because that way you know that every time you create it is the same the same configuration?
Yeah, Elastic Beanstalk just added support for Docker like a few weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah, we have not gone that far.
Maybe someone can talk about that now.
All right. All right, sorry, I jawboned longer than I
Any of
intended.
your components are telling you there's a new version, aren't your outbound policies too liberal? get rid of any out, figure out what needs to go out, and only let it out.
Some days, yes, and it's that challenge of package JSON and Bower JSON or whatever.
I mean, outbound policies, like
Any out is a problem. You need to actually figure out what needs an outbound policy.
Well, the main thing with Bower is you have to be very specific in terms of the
well, I mean,
version.
so what's happening though, where like when it installs npm or when you do an npm install, which it's going to do, it's going to go through and look at all the different packages that are out on the internet. They're coming from GitHub for the most part that need to be installed with your package. And it's going out and it's actually building the application on the node instance. And that includes going out. And so npm is being used for the node container. Bower is being used for Angular, which is the web browser piece. But it's doing the same thing. It's going out to GitHub. And so what we're saying there is it's going through. If you just put a star in there, it'll get potentially the latest version. So if you put an actual version number, it won't do that. So there's some part of that install build process where it can ask you for input when you're building your application. So if you're doing that locally, that's no big deal because you can give it an answer. But that's happened in this headless environment where, but in terms from a security perspective, it's interesting because every time you're building this, we're going out and pulling out a bunch of stuff from GitHub and installing it and
so you
running
can have
it.
a private npm repo.
You could have a private npm repo if you do that locally, but I don't think AWS has the ability to run a private npm repo like that. So that might be an area, if you really wanted to do that, you might go with something like Docker and that'd be the only thing I could think of that you might use to do that. So it's a little bit interesting. The whole concept of security and Maven does the same thing when you're building a Java application. It's going out to Maven Central and getting all these versions of all these different packages of software. And from a government perspective, that's very interesting. What is the vulnerability? There's a lot of that running all over the place now. That's like standard operating procedure.
Standard operating procedure pretty much means disconnection. So.
Yes, I know. And so from that perspective, but it's interesting to think about that though and say, what is, because I've had clients ask me, what is the vulnerability that we are up against? Because we're pulling stuff, whether in Java and I'm pulling stuff from Maven Central or pulling it from the NPM repo. And even if you're running your own private repo, you usually have that configured where if it doesn't know what something is, it's going to go out to the internet and get it and bring it back and just proxy it and keep a cached copy of it. I mean, you can certainly lock it down and do that, but it's a lot more painful. So unless you've got folks who are being militant on the security side, most folks aren't. In fact, I know some organizations that security folks probably don't even know it's doing that, and that's what it's doing because that's what people have done to get it to work. So.
What?
Huh?
That wouldn't go on.
No, never.
Security costs.
So anyway, but yeah, no, those are all really good. Those are going to be ongoing concerns. I mean, it's happening. That's the way a lot of software systems are working nowadays. But should we constantly be questioning those and saying what if or how would if I was trying to get something malicious in there? What's my ability to do that? That's an interesting question.
No, we're probably running out of time. But would you guys have enough experience, or in your experience with Karma and all the other testing platforms, is that enough worth of a talk down the road?
Yeah,
looking at that stuff.
Cool.
I foolishly, we all did this wrong. We started writing Angular. And we had this big app and no testing behind it. And so now we have to learn this domain-specific language behind it. Someone's mentioned Jasmine, so they started out just making Jasmine seed runner. But now we have Karma that does that too, or Mocha, or CoffeeScript.
Yeah. And even worse, we have testing, but it's never changed since the first day it was put in. And that is very easy to have happen, where every developer needs to know how to implement tests. So you're absolutely right. It's definitely worth the presentation.
Yeah, and I think it's probably not as much a presentation as it is an ongoing conversation because the presentation from 9 months ago is different than it would be today, which is probably going to be different than it's going to be first quarter of 2015.
Yeah, that drove me crazy. I found some year-moo tutorials, and his own repository doesn't work now. It's only been 3 months. So you put it up there.
Right, and so that would be and I think the important thing is consistency, right? Something that worked 15 months ago probably still works fine now. It's same thing. It's a matter of someone committing to we're going to do it, keeping the tests up to date, making sure all that goes. So.
All right.
Did you ever consider
having a dev CI environment actually wound up pushing to Amazon Cloud at the end of
We run a CI. We have a Jenkins running. In fact, well, we have a Jenkins that we ran for a while, but we have another CI environment that just does simple scripting of it, and we never trusted it enough to have it do pushes. And it's the kind of thing where once you know it works and you're satisfied with it, and you got somebody who knows how to do it and set it up correctly, then yeah. But I definitely wasn't at that level of confidence.
So in this system right now is pre-production, so some of those are definitely things that are on the table that we want to do soon.
So not even manual push on your CI?
What's that?
Not from CI.
No.
We do it by hand, still from the developer.
Right. But I believe there's probably ways to do that. We just haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yep. So actually, Andy was going to go ahead and fire up something now. And do you know how to get that full screen from this?
You can't really full screen.
You could hit this thing. This will give you a little closer.
I think, but I need to close.
Oh, you're in there? As long as you're mirroring.
I thought there was a way to have it.
Do I need to join the
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Right, you do, Tom. You're absolutely right. That didn't go too good. No, dear. Go push back. Oh, there he is there. Okay.
Oh, wait, there it is. There it is. So, and to make this go, I don't think you can go full screen.
That's what I was wondering. Hang on, let me add Tom. Tom
Robinson.
Robinson. Whoops.
No. Yeah.
Any idea?
Might try Thomas.
I think it's 4th one.
Thomas Robinson.
Yeah. Can you do it by email address?
Yeah, it's Thomas.Robinson@gmail.
About that one. That guy?
The one above is me.
Oh, there you go. All right. There. Now we get it. That's fine. There now.
Oh, man.
All right.
Andy.
Do we want to jump in?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, so again, my name's Andy Heifetz. We're going to talk about deploying Meet applications. We're going to go through just 5 slides, and then we're going to hand it over and look at some code. But definitely keep it interactive. Any questions, just feel free to jump in. So just to kind of start, so we're all on the same page, for anyone who's new, Mean.
I got a couple folks, so that's good.
Yeah, we've got Mean as, stands Mongo, Express is the development framework, Angular is the front-end framework, and Node is the execution engine, and JavaScript's a programming language. And with the Mean stack, they don't really say anything about deployment. So we divided deployment up. That's a big topic with continuous deployment and integration in your whole CI tool chain, really into 4 functions. So you have the infrastructure provisioning piece, so your network, compute, storage. Then you've got to configure your infrastructure. It could be, just a single server. It could be a cluster of server, like a Mongo cluster, like a replica set. And then there could be a lot of dependencies between that and other services that you have to wire them together. Once you have that, then you have your application deployment. And we really look at that as 3 main functions. Is after you get out of your CI build system, pass all your unit tests, got to securely transfer your code to your environment. You've got to do your cutover, your hot swap. And then what's interesting with the cloud environments.
What work? I got it.
All right. And with your cloud environment, it's interesting when you have these auto-scale environments, not only do you have to push code if you have a new build to push, if you auto-scale up and you go from like 2 to 100 servers, they have to pull the latest code. So you have to just kind of push-pull mechanism in auto-scaling environments. And it's nice that Elastic Beanstalk, Roku, some of the platform as a service handles that for you. If you don't have those, you kind of have to roll your own. And the last piece is a whole pipeline management, is doing the whole orchestration, from developer machine to test to production. This is a whole, week's worth of talks in here. But we'll touch on bits and pieces of this as we go through. So, exactly what Doug said. There's a variety of different deployments because you can use Node in so many different applications. You can have the single server, the stack on one server. You can have, your web applications where you've got a web form with an auto-scaling Node tier, web tier, and then a Mongo cluster back in. And you can get into some really more complex enterprise applications where you've got them across regions, different data centers across the country. You want to have DNS routing, you have your CDN caches in front. You've got all your back-end services where it's like Redis, memory caches or security groups, Logstash agents running enterprise service bus. So you can get in some really complex deployments where it's not just pushing the Node app. You've got to push it and then wire everything together and have some assurances before you deploy it. So when we look at deployment, it's pick the right tool for the job. So we kind of had 3 categories depending on your deployment complexity. So if it's just a server, you can run a bash script. You can grab a machine image, pre-built one, a VM one you pre-built, or an Amazon image. You can use Chef Puppet to configure your servers. If you're going to a single application, especially web apps, the platform as a service options are really good. So we just heard about Beanstalk. There's Heroku. Amazon also has OpsWorks, and there's a whole slew of different platform as a service providers where they're offloading a lot of work, but you don't have as much flexibility in certain situations. And if you're deploying these very complex systems like we saw before, you can use, for Amazon, CloudFormation, which is a way of capturing your whole infrastructure as a JSON file, deploy it, and usually write some custom tooling around that. And we've written a Node app for deploying Node apps, so we'll show that later, and it's all open source, so you can go take a look at it. And the last point to note is these aren't mutually exclusive. So if you look at Elastic Beanstalk, under the covers, it's running CloudFormation scripts. So if you go into Elastic, you go into your Amazon account, you look at CloudFormation, you'll see all these scripts that Beanstalk spins up. You can use CloudFormation to run Chef scripts and to converge your boxes. So they're not mutually exclusive, so you got to kind of mix and match and pick the right tool. Yeah, so we can go into, we can switch over to a quick example, especially if you're new. You can, to MeanStack, you can just go to Amazon. They have AMIs that are free, you just pay for your usage, that already have Mongo, Express, everything installed. Bitnami is one of them. There's several others. Definitely check them out before you use them for production, but if you're doing development, it's real easy to spin up. And we can show that real quick. Just. So if everyone's not familiar with Amazon, this is their kind of front screen, and they have a lot of different services to use. We'll just use their virtual machine. And we'll launch a new one. And they have a marketplace, so we'll search for a mean one. So they have a couple here. There's different providers. Obviously, use with caution if you're using someone else's machine, but you can just pick one. They have their pricing, which is, it's free for theirs, you're just paying for the Amazon costs. So you can, you can put in a VPC, you can configure, everything you'd normally do with Amazon. Security group, it kind of comes pre-populated with security groups. Obviously, we'd want to lock these down so your box isn't open in case there's any more Heartbleed vulnerabilities that come out. There we go. So yeah, so that's easy. So if you want to hold MeanStack, there you go. You can go and clone your repo. Everything's Express is already running, and we can log into that in a minute. It'll take a few minutes to, or about 30 seconds to spin up.
Just curious, how many folks have spun up a Amazon EC2 instance of any sort?
Okay. Yeah,
a chunk. Not everybody, but a chunk. But I was just curious as we're getting into it.
So it's a lot of it.
Huh?
Like a third? Or I didn't see the percentage.
I would say more than that. I'd say probably just over half. Yeah. Just over half.
Yeah, so if you want to play around, you've got an app you want to test out, it's a real quick and easy way to do it.
Same account, they go buy books. You can spin up a server farm.
Yeah, they have some free tiers.
By far, the hardest part is getting your SSH private key
to the iSSH app on your iPad.
Oh, you did it on your iPad.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I think the other thing people upload or like their projects with their Amazon keys embedded, so if you want to look for one of those, you can have something.
Yeah. So if you make your own virtual machine image you put out there, obviously take your keys off that or rekey it. Yeah. So we talked, on the very simple side, if you have a single server, you can go get a machine image. The medium web apps really good for Elastic Beanstalk. So now we'll talk a little bit about CloudFormation. So really, if you have a very complex infrastructure, you can describe it all in JSON for Amazon. So all your DNS entries, your subnets, your route tables, your VPN connections, your storage. You can specify, I want SSDs, I want to RAID them, I want to string them together. So you can capture all that as a JSON file. And then you can spin up these purpose-built environments. Like I want to develop an environment for this sprint or this feature branch, and you can spin up your whole infrastructure and then tear it down.
Do you happen to know what the difference is with CloudFormation and the VPCs, the virtual private? Are they related to each other? Or?
No, so CloudFormation is really Amazon's JSON language for defining all of the assets.
Okay.
And we'll spin one up. We'll look at one in a second.
Yeah. A CloudFormation or a VPC?
Both.
Okay.
So you can
a VPC captured in a
CloudFormation. So CloudFormation is the language for capturing it, and VPC is like a more consistent.
It's a software-defined. A VPC is nothing more than a software-defined network.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and we'll spin one up. We'll spin up a mean instance that through CloudFormation that spins up a VPC, its own a public-private subnet, the NAT tables, a Mongo instance, a Node instance, and download the application and start running it. So
cool.
All with the press of a button.
All with the press of a button. So we developed a Node application, or actually a mean application, to actually run the CloudFormation script. So if you develop these JSON, you can upload them to this portal tool that's a catalog of version control and permission. So you can just say, hey, I want this cluster, I want this instance, spin it up. Really good for dev test teams. It's on GitHub, so definitely check it out, Openware Landscapes. And it's also a great example, Matt wrote it, of mean application. So it's a good reference, if you're developing your own. So.
A little bit of AI and it'll take over the world, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It can spin up itself.
It's already taking.
It's like a virus, so keep going. So let me hand it over to Matthew, and
all right,
we'll give us a walkthrough.
So you're using Travis CI in there too. That might be fine just to mention as you walk through.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna show you our app. It's a MeanStack application that Andy designed and I built, and.
Any better?
Yeah.
The other way. Is that better?
No.
Other way? Better?
Everybody see a bit better. So I'll show you the app, and then we'll dig into the code. And one of the things that when I first started out with MeanStack was, what's the tool chain, right? Like how do the Rockstars code mean? So I'm going to just kind of show you the tool chain that has been passed down to me from the Rockstars. So here's landscapes. If you want to take a look at this. We literally released this open source today. It's on GitHub under openwarelandscapes.io. So go ahead and take a look. And it's interesting you said, oh, people upload their keys. Right? I literally just went in and deleted our keys. So.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So
make sure to delete the history too.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll rekey our systems after this.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to go delete the key right out of Amazon. So that's kind of funny. Anyway, so I'm gonna one of the things we can do here is sign up. So I'm gonna I'll just log in as admin and we'll go from there. So if you download the app and run it, you log in as admin at admin.com, and the password is admin.
And it's in the README file. So
it's in the README file, but okay. So this is landscapes, and you'll see here Andy's actually gone in and set up a bunch of landscapes. Kind of nice to look at. You can include a description and an icon, and here you see we have kind of array of landscapes here to look at. So this one here you'll see is a landscape to deploy a landscape. So let's take a look at that. Under the hood here is this cloud formation template, which we had just talked about. So you see, can anybody? Is this readable at all? So.
By the way, I can put the HDMI on your machine. But the recording is still the Hangout. So if you want to use the full.
Yeah. Give me the HDMI. That'll help you able to see a little better.
That might make it look easier to read.
Because if we're gonna dig into the code and all of that, try that. All right, there we have it. I don't know, is that any better?
Sure. Yep.
Okay, great. So there's landscapes. So you'll see so the resources that are available inside of this JSON here. So down below, this is the actual CloudFormation template that defines a Mongo server, a Node server, a virtual private cloud, and what is the
demo security group?
Oh, and a security group. Okay. So and I don't know if you can. Do you know how to zoom? Anybody know how to zoom in the Mac?
Control plus.
Oh, three fingers.
Plus.
Oh, no. That didn't work.
Correct.
Control plus.
Command.
Or command
Plus. Yeah. There we go.
You may need to reshare your window again. I'm not seeing it on the broadcast.
Okay. I don't know how to do that.
So Alt one above tab to get to your hand.
Yeah. There's some magic set of keys.
Where's your hangout?
I'm gonna just go down there and control them. Yeah, there you go.
But one of the nice things about Cloud, it's all JSON, so you capture your whole infrastructure really as infrastructure as a code. But looking at JSON, thousands of lines of JSON gets tiring.
You need to go back. Is there any tool to do that better?
So they don't really have their tooling, so that's what we're working on. This was part of it, is to start improving the experience and then have visualization. And
thank you.
There's a lot of open source tools out there we're trying to string together to do it.
Well, we're in the process of actually building out a tool to design and view CloudFormation visually. So, but this is a CloudFormation, and it just you can see bucket names. Almost everybody here is familiar with AWS, and this is great. What my favorite thing about this is that I can put this in source control and I can track it, and I'm able to evolve and grow my infrastructure the same way I grow my code, because I have found 9 times out of 10 when something goes wrong, it's an infrastructure or configuration problem. So it's great to use the same tools. So in addition to that, there are parameters that we have and some mapping. So let's go ahead and deploy a landscape. So is this one okay to deploy?
Yeah.
Maybe? Okay. So here you'll see. We'll name this stack. Demo stack. We're going to put it in East. We'll have a description. And billing code if you want to be able to charge back and keep track of that. That's kind of some future things. Here are the parameters we're going to put in. So bucket name, zone ID, local IP, network prefix, and then you click a button, and it just deployed it to Amazon. So everything that was defined there. So in Amazon right now, they're spinning up that VPC, a Mongo box and a Node box right now. So I want to go take a look at this, and over time, as I do more, Landscapes provides me with a record of who did it, what were the parameters I used, and it also tells me some, how did I tag this, right? If I go and deploy another one, we'll just go and deploy. I'm going to use the same name and intentionally cause an error. What did I call it? Stack. Okay.
Eventually we'd hit our credit limit and they'd just stop spinning up servers.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So now I'll deploy this one, and boom, it's pink. Obviously, pink means error, right? Red means error. So I go look, and landscapes tells me, hey, you've already got a stack with this name. So that we're actually getting feedback from CloudFormation and including it in the graphical user interface. So that's kind of the basics of landscapes. In addition to that, you'll see if I log out and sign in as myself. One of the drawbacks to CloudFormation is that if you give someone access to deploy stuff on CloudFormation, and so I'm working on something up there, and then somebody on QA team or whatever goes in and says, oh, I need to delete that, and they delete the wrong one, they're going to delete my resources, and there's no way to really handle that kind of security effectively. So that's one of the reasons we have created this. So if you want to give your test team a set of tools to be able to spin up an environment to run a test, or your dev teams, yeah, go ahead, spin up what you need, and you're able to keep track of it all and manage it with permissions as well. So I'll demonstrate that in a sec here. All right, so you'll see here on Landscapes.io, I have view access and deploy access, but I can't see weather analytics. I have access to Chef, right? Because I create a little DevOps group for myself. So I know these other landscapes are out there, and in a future version, I would be able to request access to those. So that's pretty obvious. And then these are also editable. So if I want to go in here, and right now it's pretty tough to edit these, but if I needed to make a change, I can update this CloudFormation. Save it. I can version this, create a new version, and now you'll see I have version 1.1 of this, and I'm able to kind of grow using the graphical user interface. So that's kind of landscapes. Any questions on that?
So is this like making what you did earlier faster? You don't have to go to Amazon and...
Yeah, so with Amazon, you could go to the Amazon console and just upload your JSON and do it, but you don't have the security controls. You don't have like that catalog and the permissions.
So would you still have to go to Amazon and set up like the meme stack and then have landscapes?
Well, I guess the first one you would, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So so in here in Administrator we have groups and permissions. So here I've created a DevOps group, and you can see I've given myself read, update, and execute control over these two. So you're able to kind of control, provide some access controls to that. So that's landscapes. If there aren't any other questions, we can kind of dig into the code, which is way more fun anyway.
Extending on the same question, so we did this landscape, we didn't create an EC2 instance. So it's deployed with the EC2 instance that we created.
Yeah, so what this is doing, when we deployed it, you could switch over to the Amazon console. What it's doing is deploying a virtual private cloud, which is it's creating subnets and route tables and NAT instances. So it's building a whole network layer. Then it's deploying a node server, so it's an EC2 instance with Node, and it's also deploying another one with Mongo, and then it's wiring the connections up between the two.
So is landscapes deployed in Amazon Web Services?
Yeah, exactly. So if you click on like the VPC stack that just finished creating, the one right above the top one.
Oh, this guy, right?
Yeah, and if you click resources, so you can see here's all the network stuff it did. It's creating NAT permissions and backend subnets and DMZ subnets and the routing. So it's taking care of all your network infrastructure. Now it's going to deploy Mongo, spin up that server, install Mongo from a bare metal or from a blank VM, configure it, then stand up Node, configure it, and wire them together, and then deploy the application.
You choose machine size.
Yeah.
EC2 for each of these things.
Yeah.
Customize.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can set up a list, and then here in the landscape itself, you'll see in the template, right? One of my parameters is.
It's not in this one. The weather analytics has
right.
it.
Right. Weather analytics. I know. There it is. Yeah. One of my parameters is instance type, and you can see I have a defined set of values.
Which is great for testing. So we're doing performance testing. So hey, let's spin up with a large, see how it does. Let's spin it up with an extra large. Are we getting different performance? So you can quickly, because it's hard to predict performance beforehand on instance size. So Amazon, spin them all up and just try them and run the test together, and then shut them all down and pick the one you like, or the one that meets whatever performance profile you need.
Any other questions?
Great work. Thank you for introducing.
Yeah, so this is all open source. We're giving this
information.
away.
Yep.
Feel free to grab the code and deploy it. If you have questions, we have a list. You can post questions to Stack Exchange. We're monitoring there. So we're ready to provide you with help and support.
Yeah, and it's a great Node app. It's a good structure, especially.
Yeah, if you're just starting with Node, it's I probably don't want to quit here. How do I get out of this full screen?
Just push it all the way to the top, the cursor, all the way to the top, and then go to that little blue thing.
That little guy, see, I'm learning something. That's great. All right, so let's look at code. So I use WebStorm. Anybody else use WebStorm?
Yep.
So yeah, WebStorm's a great. What does everybody use? Anybody?
Sublime.
Sublime.
Yeah, the big one.
Yeah, that's kind of probably the other way to go. But anyway, I've been using WebStorm for a while. I just find it's fast. It's well integrated. And I like the JetBrains tool. So
developing with pleasure.
Is that what they say?
That's IntelliJ's tagline.
Yeah, IntelliJ's another great tool.
Yeah, it's JetBrains.
So kind of at the core here, you'll see this is so here's my root project here. So architecturally, this is broken into, you'll see app and live, right? So app is where the front end lives, and live is where the back end lives. So app is, all my Bootstrap and CSS and, Angular code. And then in here, the live is all the, basically Node.js and Express.js code. So one of the things that I find challenging to do is how do we configure and deploy this across environments, right? That's kind of a tricky thing to do. So I like this structure here, and I will share it with you guys. So you see, I have an environment defined for for each of these. And when you start up, when you kick off Node, right? You can define the Node env. Is everybody familiar with that? So you capital all caps Node _env. And let me kind of go to our, I've got this, here you'll see, can you see it here? But it's node env, equals production, and then node space, server.js, or node _env equals test. So, and then, if you don't specify the node environment, then it kicks off into development mode, which doesn't cache things, so you can quickly iterate. So, based upon that, we go into the code, and so there's one of the things I'm going to do is, hey, I want to have a different Mongo store, right? So I name my Mongo stores here really kind of simply, right? So there's production. You can set those to whatever you want, obviously, and then in Express, I actually go in and I say based upon the node environment. Right, I grab you'll see app configure. Now this isn't Express 4.0. This is old. I hate to say it's old school, right? But yeah.
Last week.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But so this uses so this configuration won't work. I'll probably have a 4.0 version ready in a couple months. But but it's basically setting tools like. Yeah, there you see I'm not caching, and I set up my static views and things. So and then this connect to live reload, so that when I make changes to a file, it automatically reloads it, and I can see it show up in real time in my browser. So as I'm making changes and saving the files, the changes are appearing on my second or third screen. So that you can that's what I love most about the mean stack, is that you can rapidly iterate through everything, every phase of development. So a couple other things I wanted to touch on were if you're not familiar with Bower and Grunt, you should be. Everybody knows Bower and Grunt. Yes. Okay.
Have you looked at Go?
I have. I like Go.
Have you decided to switch?
No, I'm not that cool.
Okay.
Primarily because there's a lot, like Grunt's pretty mature, and there's a lot out there already. I think in 12 months I'll probably switch, because all the cool kids are. But
Yeah, there was an issue with Go. If you have a very large project, doing a lot of parallel processes at once might block your computer.
Oh, really?
I mean, that's only if you have an extremely large.
So, no, I'm probably going to stick with the tools that I know right now. One of the nice things I do like about WebStorm is that it's actually integrated with Grunt. So if you go down here, you'll see I can double click and it pulls up my Grunt tasks, and then I can just all that integration is baked right into WebStorm, which is one of the reasons I like it too.
I'm with, but it's too much.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, use the tools. I like to be a generation behind the cool kids. So because I think they've worked out all the problems, right? So another thing I would recommend everybody take a look at, especially if you're doing open source, is Travis. Is everybody familiar with Travis? Okay, so Travis is an automated tool. So I've gone in. So this is travis-ci.org, and it's a free continuous integration tool. And what Travis is going to do, and you'll see it's here. It's going to run my automated
It's free for
tests.
public repositories,
For
right?
for public repositories.
So for your
right.
private,
for
you
open
pay
source.
for it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
for
private. You got to pay for it. And I think the value proposition's there. So take a look at it. But it basically is going to run all my automated tests for me. It's going to build my project, run my automated tests, and then it shoots me an email and lets me know, hey, this thing, somebody just checked in, a breaking change. So I know immediately as soon as it's checked in, which is I'm a big fan of do the 20% of the work that gets you 80% of the coverage, right? Because testing all the edge cases is crazy, but definitely. So there was a question on what testing tools to use. So I'm a big fan of Karma. So look into if you're going to do one, go ahead and I would say start off with Karma.
You guys mentioned both Bower and Grunt. Do you often use Yeoman? Just stand it up and wrap it all together?
Well, yeah.
Just
So,
for the
yeah. So I started this with a generator, right? A Yeoman generator. Everybody familiar with Yeoman? Scaffolding tool. So, but I ended up changing it a lot, and we're probably going to build our own Yeoman scaffold for our applications. But we're going to, this is our way of doing it. So we'll probably open source that too. So there you go. Another thing I would highly recommend not doing, and let's see if that's, oh good, I'm not doing it, awesome. So like I would highly recommend not publishing your AWS keys in your open source projects. In addition to that, I would also recommend when you're talking about dependency management, don't use stars, right? So the versioning is expressive here. So basically the way I have versioned this is like with Angular route. I want version 1.2 and then the latest versions of that. But I don't necessarily want 1.3 because it might be a breaking change for me. So as you're creating your bower.json and your package.jsons, really kind of think through how you're defining your dependencies. So that saved me a lot of time.
I comment on keys, by the way, and that is something that you can do that's beneficial. Is if you need to use AWS services and you have the keys in the code now to use them, create IAM roles. That's fire the instance up under that role, and then it doesn't need the key.
Yes.
So it worked very well.
Yep. That's definitely a best practice. Yep. So when we built landscapes, that we wanted it for people who weren't that sophisticated to have a way in. So. Unless anybody has any specific questions, that's all I got.
All right, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Good, thank you. In general, like how well do you think Angular is going? Like, I've heard it's
plug in directly.
Really?
Nice, actually, other side. Are you ready for me to
I
switch
think
gears?
inside of a web inside a web
Was
farm,
that ready for me
I
to
would
switch
definitely go that way.
presentation?
So you have to, you know,
Sure.
I mean, obviously the fastest thing is to write all your own JavaScript.
It's not what that is. So I did do a little bit of trying to pull together some of these different sources in preparation more for other conversations, but I figured I would share this as well. You know, the security people, of course, like infrastructure as a service platforms, whereas devs, we're like, who cares? I obviously work at a startup, so I wear a hoodie and shorts and flip-flops to work. So we're a bunch of developers, and we're just trying to push out code, right? This would kind of break down where we're at. So, you know, I was thinking about why I would want to use Heroku versus using CloudFormation, which on Rackspace they have Heat, which can take a CloudFormation file and deploy it there as well. Or even Elastic Beanstalk, Elastic Beanstalk is kind of in between these two, right? It'll auto-scale, kind of like it's a platform, but you still have access through different methods to the infrastructure itself. Then you get crazy kids that always want to put everything as a service, such as computing as a service, which I thought was weird. So we were talking about a few different things. I've heard the phrase DevOps, continuous delivery, get product. That cycle, I brought this up as well for that. And then we're talking a little bit about how developers are starting to do more and more. So Netflix is kind of uses the phrase no ops. And so what does that mean? That the difference between the two is that in no ops, a developer can really do a lot more. When you push in production, you can almost say they're getting no ops there, right? So that was just a few of, there's a couple other things, like what's the difference between what DevOps is versus traditional waterfall, instead of just software development, he hands it off to testing, hands it off to operations, and then a security guy's like, oh, wait up, redo it all, your turn. DevOps is where you try to use empathy and work as a team throughout the entire process, create a tighter iterative loop, and we go from there. You basically do not have, we just throw it over the wall anymore. We're talking about lean. This is kind of the culture that's being created right now with with DevOps in general, and that's what we're talking about. We talked about Chef, it's infrastructure as code, how we deploy things, whether it be a CloudFormation file, whether it be how we're going to deploy it to Heroku. Capturing that and version control is a lot better than just having a notepad with, with basically what I'm going to do here in about 5 minutes, which is have a notepad of all the command lines that I need to do to make this stuff work. And so I basically failed in making a more complete PowerPoint, but I figured I'd make it up by watching you fail by doing my coding. Right? So, like I said, I'm not really a Node developer yet. Probably won't be anytime soon, but I am very interested in how it will all work in the near future. So, what I'm going to do is basically go through this process. I found this really cool application online.
Famous, dangerous words. Hey, operations, I found this cool application online.
Yeah. And I am, obviously I didn't really review the code beforehand, but I want to deploy it as quickly as possible. As soon as I can get another web browser brought up. And then, so here it is. It's this thing called Landscapes.
Oh,
The
all right.
IO.
We get to see if it works now. This is great.
So, like I said, I failed on the presentation. I will probably fail at this.
That'll work.
No, but let's try it anyway.
That's great.
Right? So I cloned my repo here.
That's awesome.
I lost my PowerPoint. And right, there we go. And basically, first step is that you just do a Heroku create. You do a sign up. I did have that in the PowerPoint before. Create an account, confirm your email, download the toolkit. I've done that already. So what this is doing is it's going to actually create its own little dyno is what they're called. OpenShift calls it a gear. One cool thing about OpenShift is that it has a Jenkins gear as well. So if you want to do CI throughout, it's really easy to throw up a Jenkins server and start getting going with that. So now, basically, all I have to do to push it out there is do git push Heroku and then master. And I would need to be in the actual repository, which would help. So we're going to do this again. Okay, now I'm going to do git push Heroku master. And so this is pushing from my local Git repo directly to Heroku.
What's it do about dependencies? Is Heroku pulling in?
It is pulling them in directly.
Okay.
I have a feeling that you could do a vendoring if you really wanted to.
Vendoring?
Vendoring. I haven't tried it in Node, but in Rails, this is what I would do. We have gems, and I would vendor them locally, as in I would have copies of those gems locally in a /vendor folder. And that way I can make sure that it doesn't go call out to Ruby gems, which was the NPM version. All right, so I've got this app up. Let's see if it'll work.
They're going to manage AWS from Heroku.
Yeah, which runs on AWS. So it's just how it all works. Oh, failure. Oh gosh, what's going to happen now? Basically, if you want to see what's going on with your logs, there's going to be a series of like 3 different things, 4 different things that needs to happen. We come in here and we see the logs that's going on. If we go up here to the top, it's saying that, hey, we can't find this module, connect live reload. I don't really know why, but since I'm just gonna kind of blow through this, I'm gonna go in here and do it every sysadmin does, and just cancel it out, comment it out, get it working, and then you reiterate, right?
Yeah, most likely because they don't open all the ports, they have some.
Right. And I should be pushing into production, but that's a slightly different thing. So we're talking about iterations, and I mean, this is how quickly I can iterate over how to deploy the application, which can be aggravatingly slow sometimes. And when you have a Node app like, well, if you have a Node app, you know that you can handle a lot of load on a relatively small instance, right? Mm-hmm. So you just continue through this pattern.
By the way, one thing to be aware of, this is a lesson learned, that we were using micro instances initially. Performance on them was different than medium instances, and it particularly on laptop. Test, everything worked perfectly on laptop, but in the micro instance, I/O performance was bad enough where we actually had some file issues. So
right.
It was one of those hard lessons that took us a little while to go around because we had to recode.
So this is one of the fun things. This is actually one of the few things that's different about deploying to Heroku. You actually need to create a what they call a proc file, and the root of your repository, and basically you have web dynodes that you're deploying to. You need to tell it where you're actually going to be deploying, and what is that application script. So for here, we just need to change that to the server.
I think it's on the review.
No, so it's right here. And then, unless I'm wrong, which again will make it fun. And then we push it up again. If you wanted to do a branch push, right? If I was to be a good coder, branch off of master and make my commits and then merge it back in, the way that the nomenclature would work for Heroku, it does master by default. So if I wanted to then say my branch is named this, branch 123, I would then just tag it with a : master afterwards, and it would push up that branch as master to this node. So let's check how we're doing. We're still not there yet because I haven't even created an instance of Mongo for it yet. So and that's what we're saying. Hey, we failed to connect to Mongo because we don't have anything for localhost 27,000. Pretty easy to add on a. I've already spoiled the rewards. We add it on. We then will need to know where that URI actually is. Yeah. And of course it's, okay, there we go. So this will tell us actually where our MongoDB instance is located at, that's available to us. I have no idea where things are yet in this repo. So I'll just do a quick search. I see, oh, config in development.js. That's cool. We'll go ahead and put that in here. Tell it where to talk to. Save that.
That's a great tool.
And again, we've already done how many pushes to production right now? And we are good to go. Almost.
I see something.
So, there is one little caveat that is unique to this application, and that is I need to do a npm install or city.
You say it creates a Bower JSON or something like that.
It just puts it in the package
That's what
JSON.
it is, yeah.
I also need to do the post install, which I don't have the notes on because I was literally just hacking this. And of course, if you're ever in doubt of anything, you just hit up stack SO, and you can. If you got a problem, SO will solve it. Not every time, but you can get pretty far. Yeah, I just need to format this really quick. Comma. Get rid of that. Of course, you can put the A in there. Oops. This is when I should already have command line shortcuts. Obviously, once when this is set up, you can just pull it down and redeploy it. But what I'm saying is, even if you haven't ever deployed to other group, you can pretty much figure out what's going on just from the terminal with just a few commands and get it going.
How does Heroku differ from Node.js?
It isn't necessarily. Heroku is just more popular with Ruby fans, and that's why I've said, hey, I've deployed to it because I've done it for Ruby stuff before.
There we go. Wow. How about that?
Very impressive.
How's that for a
All
live
right.
test? You know, minutes after you did it.
Race under
Open
fire.
sources is cloned in an hour.
Yep. So that's basically the type of process with Heroku. So I can quickly just show you real quick what it would look like from the admin interface. This, of course, is the app that was put in the directory above where I should have been. When it comes time to cleaning up, I mean, a simple hack is just to come in and just delete that app. Since we are only running one dyno, which is the server itself, and we're using a sandbox version of MongoDB, it doesn't cost us any money to develop on, right? So I can have a developer have a branch of his repo, deploy it, something that is visible to the public, and away we go, right? So in terms of closing down that iterative loop, making things faster, I think this is a great alternative for the dev cycle, right? To start getting things going. So, any questions?
Very cool.
Excellent.
Have you had any security concerns with this versus other methods?
Yeah, this is whenever you throw security aside with dev, right? This is
yeah, no concerns.
Yeah, no concerns, right? I mean, it's always a concern, right? I mean, but generally, I haven't done a full security review of Heroku, right? But I'm not deploying production data to it either. This is just regular development data. And so the liabilities that are associated are a lot smaller. You basically go back to just the liability being intellectual property, which if you're deploying, this is deploying to AWS, so there's just a small layer on top of additional risk than what we've been discussing already.
So are you saying you wouldn't deploy production, or you're not sure?
I don't know. Yeah, right. I live more in that DevOpsian role where chef is my friend, and that's what I do with most of my days, right? But you know, if I had a developer that came to me and said, "Hey, Tom, I want to deploy a Node app," I'd be like, "Well, I can't deploy it into production yet. I don't have everything worked out the way that I probably need to. It probably needs to go through a security review. You want to do some app development and show it to the sales team, right? You know, make sure that it's very focused. If this is what you can do with it. I mean, this has no access at all to our production data, so I can confidently be okay that we're not going to be giving away user data."
Cool. Well, we should probably let everybody get out of here about 9 o'clock, but I just wanted to say really thanks. It was really cool. So all 4 of our speakers tonight were from the group itself. So that was the first time that we've done that. And I think that's really cool. So to have some times where, so really thank you to the 4 of you guys for being willing to step up and talk a little bit. Very cool to be sharing a lot of really cool best practices from within the group itself. So we will definitely keep that going. Thank you very much. I think next time we talked about doing possibly Mongo. So I'm talking to Mongo about coming in and trying to stand up a sharded replica set, 9x9, multi-zone, you know, multi-reduce container coming up.
Sideways with flames.
There you go. So, yeah.
No, I was thinking that one of the things that I wanted to talk about, I just didn't get to it, was there is several open source projects that have the Heroku API interface, right? There's one called Dawn that uses Rails as its web API that uses Linux containers Docker behind the scenes to manage everything, right? So you could use the same exact deployment methodology and build packs to deploy internally.
So yeah, I definitely think containerization and Docker is going to be an ongoing theme through the year.
I think that
the momentum that it's
thing
got.
to look for, though, is be careful about investing in something that you think you're going to use for 10 years. I mean, Docker didn't exist prior to a year ago, for example. So what that means is with the rate of evolution or revolution or whatever that's occurring nowadays, it's very easy to look back in the old days where somebody said, we're going to put this infrastructure in place and use it for the next 10 years. And when you begin to consider that, it's the time frame that you're looking at, I think, is very much 6 months, maybe a year, and then reevaluate. Are you going to not junk it, but are you going to branch another way off at that point? Because
10 times faster than you get.
Yep.
You can run 1,000 containers, 2,000 containers on a big server instead of 1,000. Right. It's going to make Amazon 10 times more profitable.
Yep.
You're going to be able to cram even more.
Who knows? So Mongo, next time, maybe the time after that, maybe we'll do another Angular. Maybe we'll go mobile with Angular. If folks would like to do that. So anyway, thank you very much. Thanks again to our speakers.
All right, well, thank you all. I appreciate it. Very good.